The wrecking ball had already done its job, reducing the century-old sanctuary to brick and dust. But when the excavator clawed into the stone altar, the ground collapsed. What the construction crew found hidden in the darkness below wouldn't just halt the demolition. It would rewrite history and endanger their lives. Leonard Hayes had spent 32 years tearing down the past. But St. Jude's on Elm Street felt different. Standing at the edge of the fenced-off perimeter, in the sprawling industrial outskirts of Philadelphia, the seasoned foreman of O'Connor Heavy Civil Demolition wiped a thick layer of grit from his brow. The church, built in 1892, had been condemned for nearly 2 decades. It was a looming, melancholic structure of blackened limestone, rotting mahogany doors, and jagged remnants of stained glass that looked like broken teeth in the morning light. To the neighborhood, it was a dangerous eyesore. To Harrison Caldwell, the billionaire real estate magnate who had just purchased the entire city block, it was merely an obstacle. Caldwell wanted the ground cleared by the end of the month to lay the foundation for a $200 million luxury high-rise. He had paid off the city zoning office, expedited the environmental permits through Commissioner William H. Stanton, and offered Leonard's crew a massive cash bonus if they finished ahead of schedule. But churches were notoriously stubborn buildings, and St. Jude's was fighting back. "Take it easy on the east transept, Wyatt," Leonard barked into his two-way radio, his voice crackling over the deafening roar of diesel engines. Inside the gutted nave of the church, a massive yellow Cat 352 excavator was systematically ripping down the choir loft. Wyatt, a hot-headed operator with a reputation for being heavy on the joysticks, gave a thumbs up from the reinforced glass cab. The machine swung its iron claw, tearing through ancient timber and plaster with a sickening crunch. A thick cloud of century-old dust billowed into the air, raining debris onto the shattered marble floor where the pews once stood. Leonard checked the blueprints clipped to his clipboard. The city engineer, a man named Robert Klein, had signed off on the subterranean surveys 3 weeks ago. According to the documents, St. Jude's had a shallow foundation. No basement, no catacombs, no buried infrastructure. It was supposed to be a simple knock-and-clear job. But as the morning wore on, a strange unease settled over the crew. The building groaned in a way that defied structural logic. The echoes inside the sanctuary didn't sound like they were bouncing off a solid floor. They sounded hollow, resonant, and unnervingly deep. By 2 p.m., the roof had been entirely removed, leaving the sanctuary exposed to the pale autumn sky. Wyatt maneuvered the excavator toward the raised altar platform at the far end of the church. The altar itself was a colossal block of imported Italian marble, surprisingly untouched by the decades of vandalism that had ruined the rest of the property. "I'm going for the altar, Lenny," Wyatt's voice crackled over the radio. "This thing looks heavy. Might need to break it up before we haul it." "Just crack the base and drag it," Leonard replied, taking a sip from his battered thermos. "Don't get cute." The excavator's hydraulic arm extended, the heavy steel teeth of the bucket aligning with the base of the marble altar. Wyatt applied the pressure. The machine grunted, thick black smoke puffing from its exhaust as it pushed against the stone. For a second, nothing happened. The marble held firm. Then an ear-splitting crack echoed across the demolition site. It wasn't the sound of stone breaking. It was the sound of the earth failing. Leonard watched in horror as the excavator suddenly pitched forward violently. Wyatt screamed over the radio. The entire 30-foot radius of the marble floor beneath the altar simply vanished, collapsing inward like a sinkhole. A massive plume of white dust exploded upward, blinding the sight. The 30-ton machine teetered dangerously on the jagged lip of the sudden abyss, its left tread dangling over the edge. "Wyatt, cut the engine! Cut it!" Leonard roared, dropping his clipboard and sprinting across the debris-littered yard. The site erupted into chaos. Workers dropped their tools and ran toward the sanctuary. The excavator's engine sputtered and died, leaving an eerie, ringing silence in the air, broken only by the sound of crumbling masonry falling into the dark void. Leonard reached the edge of the crater, his heart hammering against his ribs. The dust was beginning to clear. Wyatt was visibly shaking inside the cab, carefully opening the door and scrambling backward onto solid ground, his face completely pale. "Lenny, I swear to God I barely touched it," Wyatt stammered, coughing violently. "The floor just gave out. It's a dead drop." Leonard didn't answer. He grabbed a high-powered tactical flashlight from his utility belt and crept to the edge of the fractured marble. He pointed the beam down into the darkness. This was no natural sinkhole. About 15 feet below the foundation, the beam of light illuminated something impossible. It wasn't a dirt pit. It wasn't a forgotten crypt filled with rotting coffins. The flashlight caught the cold, unmistakable gleam of heavy, riveted steel beams and a reinforced concrete floor. Someone had built a high-security, bomb-proof subterranean vault directly beneath the altar of an 1890s church. And according to every official public record in the city of Philadelphia, it didn't exist. "Get the heavy ladders," Leonard whispered, a cold chill running down his spine. "And shut down the site. Nobody makes a call. Nobody takes a picture. Not until we know what the hell we just broke into." The descent into the darkness was suffocating. The air trapped below the church was stale, completely devoid of moisture, and carried a metallic scent, like old brass and dried gunpowder. Leonard went down the aluminum extension ladder first, his heavy work boots hitting the concrete floor with a dull thud. Wyatt and another veteran crew member, a quiet man named Gregory, followed closely behind. The flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing a space roughly the size of a bank lobby. The walls were lined with thick, industrial-grade steel plates, the kind used in naval shipyards during the First World War. Wiring, long dead and wrapped in decayed cloth insulation, ran along the ceiling to smashed glass bulbs. "This is insane," Gregory muttered, swinging his light across the room. "The church was built in the 1890s, but this is mid-century engineering. Look at the welding on those support columns." "Why would priests need a steel bunker?" Wyatt asked, his voice trembling slightly. "They wouldn't," Leonard replied. He took a few steps forward, his flashlight beam sweeping across the center of the room. It stopped abruptly, freezing on a macabre sight that made all three men stop breathing. In the middle of the room sat 6 massive, iron-bound wooden crates. They were stacked in a pyramid formation, stamped with faded black ink. But it wasn't the crates that commanded their attention. It was what lay slumped over the top of them. It was a human skeleton. The corpse was perfectly preserved in the dry, airtight environment of the vault. It was dressed in the tatters of what was once an expensive tailored 1930s pinstripe suit. A fedora lay on the floor a few feet away, covered in a thick layer of dust. The skeletal hands were still rigidly clutching a rusted drum magazine Thompson submachine gun, a Tommy gun. "Mother of God," Wyatt whispered, stepping back. "Is that a mobster?" Leonard didn't panic. He approached the skeleton with the cautious precision of a man who had seen his fair share of dangerous things. He noticed something tucked into the inside pocket of the rotting suit jacket, a small leather-bound ledger, miraculously preserved from the dampness that plagued most basements. Leonard carefully pulled the ledger free. He flipped it open. The pages were covered in neat, precise handwriting. The name scrawled on the inside cover sent a jolt of recognition through his brain, dredging up an old piece of local history his grandfather used to talk about. Donovan Gallagher. Gallagher wasn't just a mobster. In 1934, he was the mastermind behind the most infamous unsolved heist in Pennsylvania history, the ambush of a heavily armored transit truck carrying Federal Reserve gold and unregistered bearer bonds. The official story, backed by the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, was that Gallagher and his crew had been cornered in a dockside warehouse fire and burned to ash along with their loot. Leonard looked at the crates. They weren't stamped with church insignias. They bore the faded eagle seal of the United States Treasury. "Lenny," Wyatt said, his voice dropping an octave, suddenly laced with a dangerous edge. "Those crates. You know what's in those crates, don't you?" Before Leonard could answer, Gregory stepped forward and jammed his heavy pry bar under the lid of the nearest wooden box. With a violent heave, the rusted iron bands snapped. The ancient wood splintered and gave way. Wyatt aimed his flashlight inside. The three men were struck silent. Stacked in neat, heavy rows were hundreds of gleaming, perfectly preserved gold bullion bars. The light danced off the metal, casting a warm, hypnotic, and utterly terrifying glow onto the cold steel walls of the vault. Beside the gold were stacks of waterproof lockboxes, likely holding the untraceable bearer bonds mentioned in local legends. There was at least $50 million worth of stolen wealth sitting right in front of them. "We're rich," Wyatt breathed, dropping to his knees and reaching into the crate. "Lenny, Caldwell doesn't need to know about this. The city doesn't need to know. We can back up a truck tonight. We can all disappear." "Don't touch it," Leonard snapped, stepping between Wyatt and the crate. "Are you out of your mind? This isn't loose change in a couch. This is federal property. It's blood money. You think a skeleton holding a machine gun got here by accident? Someone locked him in here, from the outside." "Lenny's right," Gregory agreed nervously. "We need to call the cops, the FBI, someone." "We call the cops and we get nothing," Wyatt argued, his face flushing red. "I've broken my back for 30 years for crumbs. This is our ticket out." The argument was suddenly cut short by the sound of footsteps echoing from the sanctuary above. "Leonard?" A sharp, authoritative female voice called out from the edge of the crater. "Leonard Hayes, are you down there?" Leonard cursed under his breath. He knew that voice. It was Dr. Evelyn Croft, the lead archivist from the County Historical Society. She had spent the last 6 months organizing protests against the demolition, chaining herself to the church gates, and filing endless injunctions claiming the site held historical significance. Caldwell's lawyers had eventually crushed her in court, but she refused to give up. "Evelyn, you need to leave the site. It's not safe," Leonard yelled up. "I saw the machinery stop from the street," Evelyn shouted back. A moment later, a pair of hiking boots appeared on the ladder. Before Leonard could stop her, the historian was climbing down into the vault. When Evelyn's feet hit the floor, she turned around, prepared to read Leonard the riot act about reckless demolition. But the words died in her throat. Her eyes locked onto the steel walls, the skeleton, the Tommy gun, and finally the exposed gold bars. I was right," Evelyn whispered, her hands flying to her mouth in shock. "I told the zoning board there was an anomaly on the 1935 electrical grid maps. St. Jude's was pulling triple the power of a normal parish. The priest, Father Josiah Mercer, he wasn't running a church. He was running a bank for the underworld," Leonard finished, holding up the leather ledger. "Evelyn, this is Donovan Gallagher, The Federal Reserve heist. Evelyn snatched the ledger from Leonard's hands, her eyes scanning the pages frantically. It's all here. Payouts, bribes. Mercer was hiding the gold for Gallagher's crew while the heat died down. But there's an entry here. The last entry. Caldwell offered a better deal. I have to seal the vault. Leonard's blood ran cold. Caldwell? Harrison Caldwell's grandfather, Evelyn said, looking up, her face pale. Elias Caldwell. He was a corrupt state senator. He didn't just take bribes, he betrayed Gallagher. He trapped him down here, took over the property rights through the church, and waited. Waited for what? Wyatt asked. For the heat to die down, Leonard realized, a sickening dread washing over him. For a generation to pass. The Caldwell family has owned this land under dummy corporations for decades. Harrison Caldwell didn't buy this block to build a high-rise. He bought it to finally dig up his grandfather's stolen gold, Evelyn said. Suddenly, a heavy mechanical whirring sound echoed from above. The ladder they had used to climb down began to rattle violently before it was abruptly pulled up and out of the crater. Leonard spun around, shining his flashlight toward the jagged opening above them. Standing at the edge of the fractured marble floor, flanked by 3 men in dark suits carrying suppressed rifles, was Harrison Caldwell himself. I have to admit, Mr. Hayes, Caldwell's smooth, aristocratic voice echoed down into the dark chamber. I paid your crew to demolish a church. I didn't realize you were also providing excavation services. I'll make sure to add a bonus to your final, posthumous paycheck. Harrison Caldwell stood at the precipice of the shattered altar, his silhouette framed by the harsh, pale daylight streaming through the missing roof of St. Jude's. He wore a pristine, charcoal-gray bespoke suit that seemed entirely immune to the swirling vortex of demolition dust. His posture was casually arrogant, the relaxed stance of a man who had spent his entire life inheriting victories. Flanking him were 3 private security contractors, their faces obscured by tactical masks, the red laser sights of their suppressed rifles slicing through the gloom of the underground vault like predatory eyes. It truly is a tragedy, Caldwell continued, his voice dripping with mock sympathy, echoing off the cold steel walls. An unforeseen structural failure. The tragic collapse of a condemned church claims the lives of a hard-working demolition crew and an overly zealous local historian. It will make the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer. I might even establish a small scholarship in your memories. After I extract my family's rightful inheritance, of course. Your inheritance? Evelyn shouted, her voice trembling, but thick with defiant rage. She clutched Donovan Gallagher's ledger tightly against her chest. This is stolen Federal Reserve gold, Caldwell. Your grandfather was a corrupt parasite who betrayed the men who bled for this. There's a paper trail in this book that links your entire real estate emir to mob money. You touch this gold, and the FBI will dismantle your life piece by piece. Caldwell's smirk vanished, replaced by a cold reptilian stare. He gestured sharply to the man on his right. Kill them. Leave the gold intact. We bring the heavy winches in tonight. Move, Leonard roared. The foreman didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing Evelyn by the shoulder of her heavy canvas jacket and shoving her violently behind the pyramid of massive wooden crates. Wyatt, driven by pure animal panic, scrambled on his hands and knees, diving behind the iron-bound boxes just as the air was torn apart by the sharp, mechanical foot of suppressed automatic gunfire. Sparks rained down in a blinding shower as high-caliber bullets struck the naval-grade steel walls and ricocheted off the heavy iron bands of the treasury crates. The skeletal remains of Donovan Gallagher, which had sat undisturbed for nearly a century, exploded into a grotesque cloud of bone dust and brittle fabric as the riflemen concentrated their fire on the center of the room. The rusted Thompson submachine gun clattered to the concrete floor, useless and broken. Leonard pressed his back against the cold, splintering wood of the crate, breathing heavily. The metallic scent of the vault was instantly overwhelmed by the acrid, choking stench of cordite and pulverized stone. "We're dead, Lenny. We're dead," Wyatt hyperventilated, his hands clutching his head, his eyes squeezed shut. "They have the high ground. We have no weapons. We are fish in a barrel." "Shut up and let me think," Leonard hissed, his eyes darting around the dim confines of the vault. The tactical flashlight he had dropped was currently rolling across the floor, its beam casting wild, dizzying shadows across the steel plates. Evelyn was trembling, coughing violently as the dust coated her lungs. "Leonard, they're going to come down here. They just have to drop a rope. They aren't going to let us surrender." She was right. Leonard knew construction, and he knew demolition. He knew that when you were at the bottom of a hole, gravity belonged to your enemy. But he also knew the structural integrity of St. Jude's better than anyone alive. He looked up past the edge of the crates. Through the jagged opening above, he could see the massive yellow underbelly of the Cat 352 excavator. It was still teetering precariously on the lip of the sinkhole, its left tread hanging over the void, groaning under its own immense 30-ton weight. The only thing keeping it from crashing down into the vault was the fragile tension of a single, reinforced concrete support beam that spanned the width of the altar's foundation. Leonard looked back down at the floor. A few feet away, lying in the debris near Gallagher's shattered skeleton, was Gregory's heavy, solid steel pry bar. "Evelyn," Leonard whispered, his voice intense and focused. "That ledger, Gallagher's notes, did it say anything about how he planned to get the gold out? If this was a secure vault, he had to have an escape route. Smugglers don't build dead ends." Evelyn squinted in the dim light, frantically flipping through the yellowed, fragile pages. The gunfire paused, the shooters above likely reloading or preparing to rappel down. "Here," she gasped, running a soot-stained finger over a faded paragraph. "He mentions a ventilation access, a bootlegger tunnel connected to the city's old storm drain system. He said it was behind the eastern bulkhead." Leonard instantly shifted his gaze to the eastern wall of the vault. Through the gloom, he spotted a large rusted iron grate, roughly 3 feet by 3 feet, secured by heavy industrial bolts. It was flush with the floor, obscured by decades of dust. "Wyatt," Leonard commanded, grabbing the younger man by the collar and shaking him out of his panic. "You see that grate? When I make my move, you and Evelyn run for it. You take the ledger, you take my spare flashlight, and you don't look back." "What move?" Wyatt stammered. "Lenny, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to finish the demolition," Leonard said grimly. Without waiting for a response, Leonard broke from cover. He lunged across the open floor, sliding on his knees across the grit and bone fragments, his fingers closing tightly around the cold steel handle of the pry bar. "There he is! Fire!" one of the mercenaries shouted from above. Bullets chewed into the concrete, inches from Leonard's boots as he scrambled toward the western wall. He didn't look up at the shooters. He looked at the massive, load-bearing concrete pillar that held the remaining weight of the altar floor, and the dangling excavator. The pillar was old, compromised by the initial collapse, and laced with vertical stress fractures. Leonard swung the heavy pry bar with every ounce of his seasoned, muscle-bound strength. The steel struck the weakened concrete with a deafening, resonant clang. "Leonard, no!" Evelyn screamed, realizing what he was trying to do. He struck it again. The impact sent a painful, jarring shockwave up Leonard's arms, vibrating through his teeth. Chunks of plaster and aggregate blew outward. The pillar groaned, a deep, structural scream that echoed in the marrow of their bones. "Shoot him! Put him down now!" Caldwell bellowed, his composure finally shattering. Leonard swung a third time, burying the wedged tip of the pry bar deep into the primary stress fracture of the support column. He threw his entire body weight against the bar, using it as a lever. Above them, the earth surrendered. With a sound like a bomb detonating, the support pillar violently snapped. The remaining marble floor of the altar collapsed inward in a catastrophic cascade of massive stone slabs and twisted rebar. Caldwell and his men screamed as the ground beneath their feet simply ceased to exist. But the true terror came from the machine. Stripped of its support, the 30-ton Cat 352 excavator pitched forward into the crater. "Get to the grate!" Leonard roared, diving backward toward the eastern bulkhead. The vault was plunged into an apocalyptic nightmare of noise and crushing weight. The excavator crashed through the opening, its massive hydraulic arm smashing into the steel floor of the vault, instantly flattening 2 of the Federal Treasury crates. A tidal wave of dust, pulverized marble, and jagged steel rained down, burying the center of the room in thousands of pounds of debris. The impact shook the very foundations of the city block. The lights from above were entirely blotted out, leaving the vault in suffocating, choking darkness, save for the weak, erratic beam of Leonard's dropped tactical flashlight rolling in the dust. For several long, agonizing minutes, there was nothing but the sound of settling rubble and the terrifying hiss of ruptured hydraulic lines leaking thick fluid over the smashed treasury crates. Leonard coughed violently, dragging himself out from under a layer of plaster and shattered wood. His left shoulder screamed in agony, dislocated from the desperate dive, but he was alive. He blinked through the thick, swirling dust, searching blindly in the dark. "Evelyn! Wyatt!" he croaked, his throat raw and bleeding. "Here!" Evelyn's voice answered from the far wall, muffled and terrified. "Leonard, we're here." Leonard stumbled through the wreckage, his boots slipping on loose debris and scattered, priceless gold bullion bars that had spilled from the crushed crates like useless yellow bricks. He found Evelyn and Wyatt huddled against the eastern bulkhead. Miraculously, the heavy iron grate covering the smuggling tunnel had been jarred loose by the seismic impact of the excavator's fall. "Are you hurt?" Leonard asked, grabbing his spare flashlight from Wyatt's trembling hands and clicking it on. "No," Evelyn coughed, clutching the ledger to her chest as if it were a shield. "But Caldwell, his men—" Leonard swept the flashlight beam over the center of the room. The scene was a chaotic graveyard of twisted yellow metal and broken stone. The excavator dominated the vault, its cab crushed flat against the steel floor. Beneath the heavy iron treads and the colossal weight of the marble debris, there was no movement. Caldwell and his highly trained mercenaries had been completely buried under the catastrophic cave-in. The arrogance of the billionaire had ended beneath the very rubble he had paid to create. "They're gone," Leonard said, his voice flat, devoid of sympathy. "The entire upper floor came down on them. We don't have much time before the rest of the foundation gives way. We need to move." He kicked the heavy iron grate aside. A rush of cold, damp air blasted upward, carrying the unmistakable scent of river water and old moss. It was a narrow, brick-lined tunnel, barely wide enough for a grown man to crawl through, descending at a steep angle into the subterranean labyrinth of Philadelphia's forgotten infrastructure. "I can't go down there," Wyatt whispered, taking a step back, his eyes wide with claustrophobic terror. He looked at the scattered gold bars gleaming under the flashlight beam. "Lenny, look at it. There are millions just lying there. Caldwell is dead. Nobody knows we're down here. We can stuff our pockets, we can take it." "Leave it," Leonard snapped, grabbing Wyatt by the collar with his good arm. "I told you that's blood money. It destroyed Gallagher, it destroyed Caldwell, and it will destroy you. The only thing of value in this room is that ledger, because it buys us our lives. Now get in the hole." Reluctantly, Wyatt dropped a gold bar he had subconsciously picked up. The heavy brick of bullion hit the steel floor with a dull, heavy thud. He climbed down into the dark tunnel, followed quickly by Evelyn. Leonard took one last look at the subterranean vault. The dust was still swirling, dancing in the beam of his flashlight like ghosts. Nearly a century of secrets, greed, and violence had been entombed beneath an empty church, waiting for the right moment to claim its final victims. He turned off the flashlight and descended into the dark, pulling the heavy iron grate shut behind him. The crawl through the bootlegger tunnel was a grueling, agonizing test of endurance. The air was thin, and Leonard's dislocated shoulder burned with every inch he dragged himself forward over the slimy, century-old bricks. Evelyn led the way, using the small beam of the spare flashlight to navigate the twists and turns of the archaic drainage system. For over an hour, they crawled in terrifying silence, the heavy weight of the city pressing down on them from above. They splashed through shallow puddles of stagnant water, disturbing nests of spiders and long, dormant echoes. Every distant rumble of the subway system above sounded like another collapse, keeping their hearts hammering in their chests. Finally, the tunnel began to incline. The air grew fresher, carrying the faint, metallic scent of city smog and the distant wail of police sirens. Evelyn pushed against a heavy, rusted iron manhole cover above her. It wouldn't budge. "Leonard, it's stuck!" she panicked, tears of frustration cutting tracks through the thick dust on her face. Leonard forced his way past Wyatt in the narrow pipe. He braced his boots against the brick walls, placed his good shoulder against the iron cover, and pushed with everything he had left. The muscles in his back screamed, tearing in protest. With a harsh, grating sound of metal on asphalt, the manhole cover popped free, sliding away to reveal the grey, overcast sky of late afternoon. They scrambled out into a deserted, trash-strewn alleyway. The cold autumn air hit their lungs like a physical blow, and all three of them collapsed onto the damp pavement, gasping for breath, completely coated from head to toe in grey church dust. Leonard sat up, leaning against a graffiti-covered brick wall. He looked down the alleyway. About 3 blocks away, the skyline was dominated by a massive, towering plume of white dust rising from the demolition site of St. Jude's. The flashing red and blue lights of dozens of emergency vehicles were already swarming the perimeter, responding to the catastrophic collapse that had shaken the entire neighborhood. Evelyn sat beside him, her hands trembling as she smoothed off the cover of Donovan Gallagher's leather ledger. She looked at Leonard, a profound sense of exhaustion and triumph in her eyes. "We did it," she whispered. "We have the proof. Caldwell's empire is finished. The Historical Society will make sure this land is protected." Leonard pulled a crushed, dust-covered pack of cigarettes from his pocket. He placed one between his lips, though he had lost his lighter in the vault. He just needed the familiar weight of it. "Yeah, Doc," Leonard said quietly, watching the distant chaos. "But from now on, I think I'm going to stick to building things. Tearing down the past is way too dangerous." The police sirens grew louder, converging on the sinkhole that had finally swallowed its ghosts. The secrets buried beneath St. Jude's prove that history refuses to stay hidden forever. And sometimes, the greatest treasures are the most dangerous traps. If you were captivated by this real-life architectural thriller and the dark underworld of the 1930s, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like button, share this gripping story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible historical mysteries and unearthed secrets. What would you do for a buried fortune? Comment below.